Uh, well, my name is Chris Story, and I'm the city manager, and I will have brief words of welcome, and then we'll hand it over to our friends that are going to help us through this important process. As you all know, the comprehensive planning process for the city of Spartanburg is only as good as we make it. And I think we're already off to a great start by having, at the moment, 78 people online, with more growing by the minute. And we appreciate your time. We're going to try to make good use of it. This is the beginning of a process. There will be many ways to participate. PlanSpartanburg.com is already up and open, and there will be sessions like this, as well as in-person opportunities and other activities that will allow you to have your voice heard through this process. But tonight we get to meet our facilitators and guides through the process. We've got two firms that are going to be helping us with it, that'll be part of this activity tonight. The first is our friends at Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, who are the lead on this project. Brian Wright and Becky Timmons will be the project leads with TPUDC, Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative. We're also joined tonight by Matt Noonkester of City Explained, and I'll let him tell you what City Explained is later in the program. But these are some of the best in the business at helping communities like Spartanburg determine their future through the comprehensive plan process. So on behalf of Spartanburg City Council, we want to thank you for your time tonight and welcome you to this process and encourage you to participate tonight and throughout. And with that, I'll hand it over to, I guess it's Brian or
Becky. Brian, if you want to go ahead and start the slides. All right, just a couple of things before we get started. Everyone, as you're coming into the meeting, it looks like we're up to 86 people now. You will come in muted. You won't be able to unmute yourselves until the end of the presentation. The presenters will be unmuted and city staff is unmuted, so we'll all be chiming in as we go through. If you do have any questions during the presentation, use the chat function. Brian, if you jump ahead, I'll show you where that is. If you're unfamiliar with Zoom, if you're joining us on the computer, down at the bottom of your screen, there's a little chat icon. If you click on that, it'll allow you to send a chat to everyone. Make sure you send it to the entire group and post your question there. We probably won't get to all of the questions that come up, but we're going to record all of the questions so that we can respond to them as soon as possible. If you're joining on the phone, there's also a chat option. If you go down to the bottom, there are three little dots that say more. If you click on those, there's a chat option. If you have only dialed in on the phone, there isn't going to be a chat option. You're just going to be able to listen to the presentation, but we'll tell you about some options to post your questions and ideas on the website after the presentation. Some of the other ways to participate, we want to remind everyone, if you're joining on the Facebook Live feed, you're not going to be able to participate in this live Q&A, but you can go to planspartanburg.com after the presentation to learn some more. There is a page on planspartanburg.com called Tell Us What You Think, and there are some ways to post questions or your ideas about the project. This whole presentation is being recorded, so the full presentation and the Q&A will be posted on the website later this week for anyone who misses it or anyone who has internet difficulties throughout the presentation. If we do have any serious issues, those of you who have used Zoom before know that it's not always the most dependable. So if something happens, we will record this presentation and get it posted for everybody to see as soon as possible. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Great, thank you, Becky. I appreciate that intro. So for those who've just joined us, we keep getting more and more people, and that's awesome. For bandwidth purposes, if you want to turn your cameras off for now, and then when we get done with the presentation, then we can turn them back on. when you have a question or something, that'll just make sure that everybody's able to see the PowerPoint. It takes up a lot of space on the internet to share the screen. So it's pretty amazing though that we can do that. I'm in Franklin, Tennessee, just outside of Nashville, and you're watching what's on my screen all the way in Spartanburg. So pretty cool. So thanks everybody for joining us. Gonna run you all through a presentation here really quick. At the end of the day, the most important part for us is really to hear from all of you, to see what you're thinking, what your ideas are, what your hopes, dreams, aspirations, fears, and concerns are, all of those things. So some portion of our interaction with all of you going forward will be us talking to you, but hopefully it'll be more of us listening to you than anything else. So I'll go ahead and get us going here. As you've heard, you've got two firms who are running this project for all of you. TPUDC is me, Becky, Jessica, who's also on the phone here, Gortz is our graphic designer, and there's several others, but these are the core of our team that'll be involved in this project with all of you. And then we have Matt Noonkester from City Explained. Matt and Jara, who works with Matt, are incredible at looking at understanding the data, the more analytical side of things, whereas we focus more on the experiential side of things with planning and design and the outreach as well. And so our two firms do different things, but do them very well together and complement each other. So we partner on projects like this all the time. In addition to these two lead firms, we have a multitude of other firms who are working with us. We have Ernie from Tool, Richard Smith from McGill, working on infrastructure. Tool works on transportation design and engineering. We have Matt working on resiliency, Chauncey focused on the equity side of planning, and James and Gwen focus on equity outreach. And then we've got Trip Muldrow from Arnett Muldrow, who is our economist on the team, and he'll be helping us understand the ins and outs of the impacts of what we're doing, working with Matt on that. So fortunately for us, we get to work all over the country and work on projects like this, cities big, small, everything in between. And it's great for us because it keeps it interesting. Every community is different and unique, but it also works out really well for the communities that we work in because we're able to experience things, to see things that are working, that aren't working in other communities, and we can bring those things and share them with the communities that we're working in. And so it's really good to have that national perspective and approach. You know, we do all kinds of cool projects and work on comprehensive plans like this. We also write zoning ordinances and do downtown plans and all sorts of things. Now, that said, one of the things that's important is, and I'll go back to this last slide, because we work all over the country, but we're not from Spartanburg, we only have a piece of the picture, right? And so we'll learn things, and we'll actually hopefully learn things about your city that you don't even know yet. But what we really, really count on through our process is to deputize all of you to become team members with us, because you know this place, you know Spartanburg better than we ever can as outsiders. And so we count on you to hold us accountable for, you know, really understanding what you're looking for in the future, as well as to give us guidance and your insights about your community. So that's, you have a more important role than you may think. It's not just coming and listening and participating in these events. It really is to help us craft that vision for the future. We take a holistic perspective when we're looking at planning. You know, any community we work in, you know, you have whatever your goal is in the middle here, and then there's all the different parts and pieces of the city that are interconnected. And when you start pulling on one thing, like you know, you start to look at zoning and you pull on that thread, it has an impact across this network, you know, on the whole other side of things. And so by looking for those connections and figuring out how things are interrelated, we're able to really start to come up with innovative solutions that we might not have otherwise if we were just thinking about one topic. And that's part of the beauty of a comprehensive plan, is that it's really intended to think about everything. Now we're starting this process, and we like to really kind of, in some ways, come in with a clean slate before we talk to all of you, so that we don't have a bunch of preconceived notions. But one of the things that we have done so far is to look at the work that you've done in the past. There's a lot of good work that's been done in the city, and so we're going to be, building on that. We're going to be looking at your old plan. We're looking at, the zoning ordinance. We're looking at your bike and pedestrian master plan. You did this amazing racial equity index study a couple years ago. There's a impediments to fair housing study that's been done. All these different things go into the sort of our process, and we make sure that we pick up the best ideas from those past efforts and the things that you all have put your time into already, so that none of that just goes to waste. Some things will have changed because times change, and people's interests or desires change, and so we'll try to pick up with this process from all of you what those new ideas are to build off of that. So for those of you who aren't planners or particularly into planning, never heard of a comprehensive plan before, we'll get you up to speed real quick here. So a comprehensive plan is really a long-range policy document. It's focused on establishing a vision for the future of the city and gives guidance for policy and growth, development, conservation, where all that happens and how much happens. And but it also has action items that are really directed at implementing that vision for the future. And so it really says, okay, here's where we want to go in the future, and here's how we think we need to get there. And then there's things that happen after it to support it and make it happen. Your current comprehensive plan has a few different pieces to it. It has a big focus on the land use element, and there's these 5 separate planning areas that sort of is broken down different parts of the city, and then areas, critical development areas as well. So our approach this time is going to be a little bit different than that. It's not going to break it down in these 5 separate planning areas so much, because like I said, we want to think about things all together and holistically, and so we know how to do that with all of your help. Now, one of the things, what I just mentioned, those 5 different areas, that's sort of a unique thing of your comprehensive plan. Not all comprehensive plans do that. And while we're moving away from that concept, one of the things that we're going to add in that is unique is this idea of equity as the cornerstone of the plan. Now, you may not know this, but this will actually be the first comprehensive plan in the country that has equity as its focus and its cornerstone. And so part of that means we have to figure out, what does equity mean in Spartanburg? It means different things in different places, and we know that in different places we've worked in. There are different types of equity as well, economic, educational, health, housing, etc. But in this plan, because it's comprehensive, we'll be able to think about all types of elements of equity and how equity can be infused into what we're doing in this plan. So we want to think about things like, how do we achieve an equitable future for everybody? And so as we go through this process, these are big questions, and so it's not something that you may just have off the top of your head. So make sure that as we go through these questions and other things on the web page, there's a whole "What does equity mean to you" section, and you can go in and add your ideas, planspartanburg.com/whatisequity. And so this will be an ongoing theme throughout this project. And while it's the foundation and the cornerstone of this plan, the plan still has to do all the things that a normal comprehensive plan does as well. This just happens to be an extra special bonus. And the thing that's really exciting about this and unique about this is that the idea of equity as the cornerstone is not a reaction to what's going on right now in the country. This actually was set in motion well before, this is, I guess, when were we hired? I don't know, last year sometime, to work on this. And it's from the very inception of this plan, equity has been intended to be the cornerstone. So it's exciting in that, through that, series of decisions that the community made to have equity as the cornerstone all those many months ago, we're now ahead of what's going on in the country. And so I think at the end of the day, people will be looking at the Spartanburg Comprehensive Plan as a model for the nation on how to move forward equitably. So when we work on a comprehensive plan, talking to all of you is important, and for me, that's the most exciting and interesting part. But there's also the data component to it. As I mentioned, Matt and Jara and Matt's team will be focused on some of the analytical side of things. But the thing that I find about data is that data starts off in stacks, and then it turns into piles. And the next thing you know, you're just drowning in data. And so for most people, this is not a comfortable place to be. There will be a few people in this process, I'm sure. We find them in every city. There's like 1 or 2 people who just love this. You know, this is their sort of safe place, their comfort zone. But for the average person, looking at spreadsheets and charts and graphs and reports and studies is just not something that people enjoy doing. And so you lose a lot of people in that process. So what we try to do is take that data and boil it down and find the relevant data for you. And we look at only the things that matter. And then most importantly, in that, we look for insights. You know, what did we learn from that data that we actually can go do something with? And so it's not going to just be, you know, lots of facts and figures, because that has an important role in this. But for me, in addition to this, I also get so much out of those just stories that people tell me. They say, well, here's my experience. I know that, you know, the traffic counts say this, but I tell you, for the past 10 years, I've sat at this light for 30 minutes every single morning. So I don't understand why that traffic data is telling you that. And so now we go, okay, well, let's go understand what that's about. And so that's kind of how we work. Matt gets into the facts and figures and charts, and I get into the stories and the anecdotes, and somewhere in the middle of all that comes out what's relevant and important.
Yeah. So as Chris had mentioned in the opening, and Brian's reiterated through the introduction, this is a 2-firm led project, and it's done like that on purpose. And it happened really almost 10 years ago now that Brian and I were able to cross paths, and we were able to have intentional conversations about, you know, what is the best comprehensive plan, which ones are working, which ones are not. And what we found was that in a lot of ways, people had to jump into one bucket from the start. Either they were more principle driven and they kind of thought from the heart and just thought this was the right thing to do. And then there was a whole nother camp of folks who were more data driven, saying, what does the analysis tell me? That's what I want to do. And what we found is comprehensive plans around the country kind of fall into one of these 2 buckets. However, by Brian and I coming together, next slide, Brian and I coming together, what we've tried to do is recognize that both of those things are important in a planning process. And there will be times during this planning process that the principles need to be upfront and talked about. And there'll be other times where people want some data and some information, some feedback to reaffirm we're on the right path. And so throughout this planning process, you will see Brian or myself kind of rise to the top and then fall to the background. And it really has to do with making sure that we're most equipped for what we have to deal with in the planning process at that time. So within the context of, you know, what is a comprehensive plan, we like to talk a little bit about why we think we develop successful plans. And so first and foremost, the best comprehensive plans that we see that we've done or anybody else has done around the country are kind of built for the community, by the community. And Brian mentioned in the opening how we're trying to deputize you to be part of the team from today forward. And we really think that that's the foundation and the strength of the plan. And so in order to do that, we want to coordinate with you as much as possible. And so we've mentioned the website. We'll have other events coming up that we'll discuss later on in the presentation, but we really need to engage with you as much as possible. And while we're doing that, you see kind of the bullseye in the middle of the slide here is we want to be visionary, we want to be bold. We want to make sure we're pragmatic in terms of how we can implement, how we can get there. Are things manageable so that we can hit the finish line that we have set for ourselves? And as part of that, we think that plans are good, and you have the private sector and you have the public sector. How do we leverage infrastructure and other things that are being done and multiple plans and projects being done so they all knit together very well in the comprehensive plan? And then hopefully, as Brian had showed you some of the plan covers and things we've done in the past, we think it's utmost importance to have high quality graphics and deliverables beyond throughout the process. So it's a document, again, we're all proud of when we're finished. The other thing that we sort of mandate of a client when we come in is that recognition that this is not the planning department's document. It's not solely their document. And the most successful plans and the most successful planning processes have to deal with an all hands on deck approach. And so we recognize that your folks in economic development are helping attract new jobs and new people to come into Spartanburg. And then the planning department has influence about maybe where they develop, how much they develop. But then it's your public services who are taking over and confirming and making sure there are roads and the water and sewer works and the school works and everything else so that it can sit within a sustainable system. And then finally, finance and administration have to help program this. They have to help find funding for it. And really when it's all four of these different groups coming together within the city is when the comprehensive plan is its most effective. So if I continue a little bit on my data trend, and I promise to not pile you with the things you saw in the slides before, but we do try to be intentional with our data analytics, and we're using a concept called scenario planning. And the reason it's great is because we have options as we're going through this planning process, and we're purposely going to look at multiple futures side by side. We're going to measure their impacts and evaluate their trade-offs to make sure we're heading down the right path. And so you see here from the graphic, we've been starting with our background research and the things we've been talking about. Very soon, we'll be building tools that will help us make informed decisions, track decisions, evaluate trade-offs. We'll be building that around your current comprehensive plan first to see where the compass is pointing and what we like and don't like as a community from what information we're able to share with you. From there, we'll test alternative ideas and kind of see which is the best fit for Spartanburg moving forward. And then we'll write the plan around it and create an action plan to go with it. So as part of that, one of the real benefits of the scenario planning is we're allowed to look at that holistic model like Brian had mentioned earlier. And it's a series of if, then, else. And so in full disclosure, Brian kind of introduced me as the math guy. So I had to get at least a logic test in here. But what we're doing is we're going to be looking at solutions, but we're going to be looking at them holistically. So let's say we create a solution that's for schools or for housing or transportation. We'll immediately look across the aisle and make sure that it's not to the detriment of another topic within the comprehensive plan. So while we'll be looking to maximize the benefit of the plan for what we want to achieve, we'll also be looking for balance to make sure we're not hurting something disproportionately to the other things we're doing great. And then as we start to put information out, we're going to try and organize it in a way that is easy to digest, something that you would anticipate. And so you see here, we kind of put it into three different buckets. The first bucket are things that describe what life might be like in Spartanburg into the future if we grow and develop in a certain pattern, or if maybe we pull back in a certain way. We'll then look at that growth and look at impacts to infrastructure, impacts to home choices, impacts to any other thing that comes up as an important topic within the planning process. And then we'll be measuring performance. So some of those values that come out of the community or a vision or the guiding principles, we'll try to find ways to measure the performance of how the plan and the things are doing at achieving those statements. And you see just here kind of putting some maps to life here. We'll be looking at everything spatially. And so here where I talked about supporting infrastructure, as growth is laid out on the map, we'll also be looking at what needs to be done to keep up with that growth, or maybe prepare or even fix things that aren't going well right now. We'll be looking at all that graphically in a mapping environment too. And finally, once we're finished, and again, this is kind of going on throughout the process, sometimes up front, sometimes in the background, but our real milestone here is to create a framework. And that framework will be what the kind of the meat on the bone that we put the meat on the bones for, which is where do land uses want to go? Can the infrastructure support it? And then we'll look at the connections between those things. That framework will then allow us to be able to work towards writing the plan as well as making the detailed recommendations needed to implement it.
Thanks, Matt. So, as we have these discussions and talk about planning and planning concepts and things, as planners, sometimes we take for granted that everybody doesn't sit around and think about planning or watch planning presentations or participate in planning projects. So there will be times when all of us will use some terminology that we are just used to using as planners. Just like when you go to the doctor or something, they use, they talk about things and you're like, what does that even mean? And so as we do that, feel free to ask us about the specifics of what these things are. You know, for me, I always have to ask Matt stuff about the data and the, you know, the math stuff. That's just not my forte. And then he asked me, you know, how I get people so excited about projects or whatever, you know. So we've, while we haven't done much in the form of research thus far, like I said, we wanted to talk to all of you first. We have had opportunity to talk to a few people. We've talked to some elected and appointed officials and some other people around the city. And we've learned a few things that are helpful for us so we don't come in completely out of touch. But you're going to add to these to this list or subtract from it as well. So what we've heard so far from the different people we've talked to, strengths and opportunities of the city. We've heard that the city is a really welcoming community and it embraces diversity. You know, when we were hired to work on this project and we learned that, you know, equity would be one of the cornerstones of the project, I thought, okay, you know, depending on the community, this could be a real challenge. And it's been really amazing that so far every person that I've talked to, it's something that they, you know, think is important. And it's something that, you know, I think a lot of people said, we've come a long way, we've made some good strides, but there's still, you know, room for improvement. And that's a fair place to be, I would say. Some places we go, they can't say any of that. And it's the first time they've even thought about equity. So, you know, I think that hearing things like embracing diversity was exciting to me. We heard about there's a strong collaboration between the city and public and private organizations. That's great because that, you know, those groups can help, you know, get involved, help move initiatives forward, you know, the city may not be able to do on their own, and can lend good thinking, you know, lots of, especially having all the higher education, the 7 institutes of higher education around, can tap into their brain power. Student horsepower as well. People can go do research and things, which is exciting. We've heard that the city is friendly to businesses, that the government is good, that the city is really a diamond in the rough. Some people think it's less rough than others for sure, but a diamond nonetheless. That it's got a really good location geographically, that they're just great churches around that really form a fabric of community. The hospital system is really good, and that it's a small enough city, a small enough place where you can really get involved and make an impact that you feel. Some cities are so big that it just takes years and years to get to know enough people where you feel like you're involved. So that's exciting. Now, weaknesses and challenges. So here you notice we don't just present one point of view. We also heard that there's still some racial inequality, and so that was, you know, at the top of some people's list for sure. But again, each person that said that also shared with us that there was, you know, a lot of improvement had been made, and people were encouraged for the future. So that's exciting. That there's a low rate of higher education attainment, lack of affordable housing options, that growth without compromising community character is a challenge. There's a lack of a cohesive plan, which is, I think, why we're here, and that's good. That's a normal place to be. The impact of COVID-19, that's huge, you know, but that was not on the radar screen, but when we were hired for this, but it's in every city we're working in around the country. Obviously, it's a big concern. Generational poverty and how to overcome that was a weakness or a challenge. Attracting new businesses and keeping them, and keeping the current businesses open, especially in the aftermath of COVID. That's a real, even a greater challenge. The limited amount of office space and low vacancy. So low vacancy is a good thing, for sure. It means that you're a desirable place to be, but we need to figure out how to allow for more business to come in to help generate tax base. And then there's an increased homelessness issue going on as well. So some people said, when we asked what should goals of the comp plan be, that it needs to be easy to use and easy to update. It needs to reach all citizens and motivate more people to get out and get involved. A lot of times, you know, it's not every day that cities do a new comprehensive plan. And so even being involved in coming up with your vision for the future is not even on the table because you have an old plan that you weren't part of. But now, not only can you be part of coming up with a vision, you can also be part of executing and implementing that vision. Another goal is stay true to Spartanburg's identity. And that, I think, for every city we work in is one of the biggest challenges, because when you get new growth and new development, you know, so often it could just have gone anywhere. It could have been in any city in the country. And it's good because there's some tax benefit to having the new business, but you've lost a little bit of your soul, of your character, of your community with new development. So how do we, one, identify what that character is and the identity is, and then how do we make sure that the plan continues to preserve that, so you're a unique place. Another goal was called out to preserve and enhance green spaces and trees, address the impacts of new development on public infrastructure. So that's some of the stuff Matt was talking about, making sure that we are able to accommodate from the city's perspective any new growth that happens. Identify and prioritize areas that need investment would be a goal of the plan as well. We're going to have exercises where you guys can help identify those places for us. And then create safer streets and improve pedestrian accessibility. Now, one of the things that we know is when you're thinking about equity, for instance, you know, not everybody has a car. But if your whole city is designed and set up so that you have to drive everywhere for everything, and you don't have a super robust public transit system, you know, it can be a challenge to get along. And so making streets that are better for people walking and biking is a, you know, one small step towards equity. I'm gonna let Becky take over here and talk a little bit about outreach and engagement, what's coming forward.
So we're really excited about a lot of the opportunities that we have for you all to participate in this process. Like Brian said, the pandemic has thrown a wrench in things a little bit, so we've had to pivot and create a lot more virtual online tools for you to participate, but we are hoping that there are still going to be some on the ground, hands-on activities that you can do in the city. So for right now, the best way to stay involved is to go to planspartanburg.com. That's the project website. That's where you'll find key dates, events coming up, ways to ask questions, ways to contribute your ideas, and ways to learn more about the project. So definitely check that out. And also register on the website. By registering, you'll also receive emails about upcoming events. Spread the word, tell people about the website, forward that link to everybody. There is actually a flyer on the website that looks like this that you can download. You can put it up in your business, you can put it up at your church, you can pass it around to your neighbors. We want everybody to know about this process. So we've got right now 98 people in this meeting. If you share this with 10 other people, we've got 1,000 people who know about the process. So we encourage everybody to spread the word.
Well, and one of the things I'll add to that is, you know, when we first started this project and we realized that we were going to have to go online for a lot of things, we began to think about not everybody actually has access to the internet. And so it's sort of our first moment of equity to think about, you know, okay, well, how do we reach people who don't have access to the internet? And so we've been doing some research trying to actually figure out exactly how many people that is in the city. And then find ways to reach out that aren't just online or just digital. While the web page is an incredible tool, if you have access to it, it's totally meaningless if you don't. And so we're working hard to find other ways to do that. Becky will talk about that more in a second.
Yeah, we didn't mention in this presentation, but there is also a mailer that's going to be going out to everybody in the city. It's going to have information about the project. What it's all about, and then a tear-off card with some questions on it, so people have an opportunity to contribute their ideas through the mail as well. And there's also phone numbers that you can call for additional information. So this is the project schedule and some of the major milestones. You can see right now we are at the very beginning, the community kickoff, although we've been working on the project for a couple of months now, doing our research and building the public engagement process. The next step is data gathering, listening to what you all have to say, looking at the data that Matt talked about, and starting to get a better understanding of Spartanburg and some of the issues at hand. We've got visioning sessions coming up. Those aren't on this schedule, but they are on the website. Visioning sessions will be September 28th and 29th. Then have Planapalooza will be October 26th or 22nd to 26th. That's going to be our biggest virtual and hopefully some in-person interactive events to really start working on the plan, to actually start writing, to start putting your ideas down into the plan itself. Then we'll take some time to work on the draft of the plan. We'll be refining the data, creating a client draft that will be reviewed internally for any sort of oversights or anything that we may have missed in our data gathering and our public outreach process. And then we're going to create a public draft of the plan, and we will present that at an open house where people will be able to come and review the different elements of the plan, talk to the consultants and staff, and understand what it is that we're presenting. And then you'll have an opportunity to comment on it, ask more questions, give us feedback, and we'll revise that draft into a final plan, which will then go to adoption, and it will be adopted by the City Council, hopefully. If you all support it, and you should, if you all are involved in the process and you see your ideas reflected in it. So one way that you can get involved right now, while we're trying to minimize large group gatherings, we know that there are still small group gatherings going on. There are people who are going to offices and churches and small groups. So we have a tool called On the Table. It's basically a meeting in a box. You can find out more about it on the website. There's an informational packet for people who would like to host it. And what it is a at your own pace, small group conversation where you talk about the issues that are important to you. There are some prompts, some ideas for things that you could talk about, but it's really what's important to you, whether it's transportation or housing or equity, whatever you'd like to talk about. Anybody can volunteer to be a host. We encourage anyone who's involved in any sort of community organizations, church leaders, anybody to host one of these, to gather some people together and to contribute to the plan by doing that. So that's going to run through the end of October. So we'll be, you can download the host packet right now, and then once you've hosted a meeting, there will also be a survey online to give us your results from that meeting.
And the thing that's great about On the Table is you don't have to know anything about planning, anything about how to facilitate a group. You don't have to have any answers for anybody. All you have to do is know people to invite. And the whole process is set up so that it's like worksheets and things that you essentially fill out. Questions that you ask your group and you can talk about, and it's very, very easy to do. And you can also, if you're not meeting in groups, you can also do this online if you have the ability to go online. A lot of people do these sort of virtual happy hours, virtual get-togethers with their friends. And so you all can get online and do this together, via Zoom or whatever tool you use to get online.
All right. Like I said, the next interactive opportunity coming up is our visioning workshops. Those will be September 28th to 29th, and we'll be posting some more information about that on the website in the coming week or two. Brian?
Yes.
Oh, okay. And then Planapalooza is October 22nd to 26th. That's going to be a 5-day workshop where we're going to have online presentations, interactive mapping exercises. There will be some technical meetings about some really specific issues where we'll bring together residents along with kind of experts in those fields. We'll have our transportation and economic sub-consultants joining us for those, and other community organizations. There's going to be discussions online. We'll have show and tells with the consultant team where you can see what we're doing. We'll do a virtual open studio where you can drop in and ask questions and talk to members of the team. And then we'll also have live Q&A. And like I said, we have some on the ground in-person things in the works, so just stay tuned to the website to find more about those opportunities.
Awesome, thanks, Becky. So at the end of the day, this whole process, the whole project, you know, it's important. I mentioned before that it's got to be a plan that works for all of you, that works for Spartanburg. It needs to be easy to implement. We don't want it to go on the shelf in the planning department and never get looked at again. And so it's really, really important to us that the plan is filled with you know, your ideas. It's exciting as a document itself. We want, you know, everybody in the city to have one on their you know, bedside table at home, for all the businesses to have it on the counter, you know, when you're at the cash register and that kind of stuff. And so it's important for us to have this thing be your plan. It needs to make sure that it works for the development community. It needs to work for the elected and appointed officials. It's got to work for, you know, business owners, and, you know, this idea of something for everyone is our kind of our theme that we'll go through in this process. Looking at it's got to work for residents and all residents, getting back to our equity component. For visitors as well, you know, getting people in and having them spend their money and then head on home, so they, you know, you're getting the benefit of the tax benefit, but not having to provide services to all of them. And then also something for everyone at all ages and stages of life, so that, you know, this can be a real place that, you know, you can, you know, from wherever you are, whenever you are in your life, Spartanburg is a great place for you. And back to this idea, the most important thing is that this plan has to contain the essence of Spartanburg. It can't just be, you know, what we did in West Fargo, North Dakota, or what we did in Nashville, or all these other places that we work. It has to be your plan. We can't just dial it in, and that's where you all come in, and it's so important that you help us determine what that means. So this is our fun thing we did here. We took your love where you live, and we made plan where you live. And so let's chat. Going to stop sharing my screen here for a minute. Looks like we've been getting some questions in the chat.
Brian, before you stop sharing, there's a few more slides. I'm going to reiterate how to chat. If there's anyone who's joined since I went over this at the beginning, to submit questions to us, use the chat function if you have it available on your computer. It's down at the bottom, the little chat button. On the phone, it's down in the lower right-hand corner. You should have 3 dots that say more, and then there's a chat option. If you can send it to everyone, then all of our team members will be able to see the question. Otherwise, if you have a private question that you'd like to send and have answered later, you could send it to any of the team members. You could send it directly to me as well and just indicate that you'd like it answered privately. For anyone that's dialed in on the phone, I'm going to change the meeting settings now so that everyone can unmute themselves if they'd like to. So if you have a question, go ahead and unmute yourself in just a minute, and we'll look and see who's unmuted and ask you if you have a question to ask us. Other ways to participate, if you are joining us via the Facebook Live feed, you're not able to participate in this live Q&A, but you can submit questions on the website. If you go to planspartanburg.com, the Tell Us What You Think page, there are ways to submit questions and your ideas. And then for anyone who, again, missed this at the beginning, this whole presentation is being recorded. The Q&A is being recorded and will be posted on the website within the next few days. We are probably not going to get to every question that's being asked. We've had a lot coming through in the chat. So we're going to do our best. If there's any that we don't answer tonight, we will post the answers to those on the website in the coming days. So we've got a lot of team members here. We've got the consultant team and we have city staff members. So I think between all of us, we should be able to answer these questions. So I'm going to let everyone unmute themselves if they'd like to. And in the meantime, we'll start looking at some of the questions in the chat. I did see one come through a minute ago that I think is important to start with. And let's see. It was related to connecting with everyone in the community. So it says, in understanding people in the community, what will be inclusive of the friends that are not tech savvy, have internet, or even a library card or a home? Our homeless friends are vital in this planning. And I know we covered some of that. We talked about sending out the mailer and things, but I want to reiterate how important it is to spread word of mouth, to talk to people. If you work for an organization that works with the homeless community, make sure that you're spreading the word, because I think going out and talking to people directly is going to be the best way to connect with everyone. And if you have ideas for us and you work with these organizations, please contact us so that we know how to get in touch.
Yeah, along those lines too, specifically on that question, we're actually working on a comprehensive plan right now in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Manchester is ranked nationally in sort of the explosion of its homeless population, as well as opioid addiction. And so we've been really working with them to come up with best practices. You know, I've been looking at all the cities around the country who've been addressing homelessness and solutions, and you know, trying to become a repository for all those best ideas. But to your point, you know, talking to the individuals themselves, because being homeless in New Hampshire isn't the same as being homeless in South Carolina or anywhere else. So I think that's a great point. Thank you for asking that.
All right, so I'm going to start at the top here. I'm going to read questions and then let whoever is best suited answer them. The first one that we had come through is South Carolina, and Spartanburg specifically, is a strong receiver of net intra-U.S. immigration and is likely to remain so for a long time. How do our two consultant firms incorporate those aspects of our present and future reality? I'll let Brian and Matt tackle that one.
Sure. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, one of the things that Tripp, our economist, does is he also really studies and understands the demographics and the the influx and people leaving as well in the city. And so trying to really incorporate what we learned from the data in that regard, and then being able to make sure that we're really meeting the needs of the people who are coming in, but then also really finding ways to feature the diversity that comes along with being having the distinction of being a immigration site. Matt, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, I just, Brian said he was coming to you from outside of Nashville. I'm actually located south of Charlotte. And so I kind of consider both Carolinas home when I think about where I function and work and play and things. And so I've been able to see a lot of this going on. In fact, because you mentioned South Carolina as the state, I was on a call this morning with somebody in the Charleston area, and they said, yeah, we hit our population projection 15 years before we were supposed to. And it's because of this just massive in-migration of folks in there. I think it's really important to maybe tack on to what Brian said is, as we're speaking with people about the plan and where they'd like to see the community focus, a lot of times I like to talk to people and ask them, well, how long have you been here? Because sometimes what happens is we have ideas from folks who have been here for a very long time, and then we have ideas from folks who are new arrivals, and sometimes they're hand in glove and sometimes they're opposite. And so one of the things I like to look at when we're asking and looking at the data and then marrying that with interactions with the community is kind of trying to see the whys. So the data is important, but why is that happening? What is important about it? And so we look forward to getting into that in more detail.
I'm going to jump around a little and tackle a couple of questions that came in most recently related to the scope and boundaries of our area that we're planning for. One of the comments was that the south side wasn't represented as an area of redevelopment. I think that was an oversight on our part when we were showing the different portions of the existing comprehensive plan. I think we missed that. That was an error on our part. It is part of the planning area. And then a question about Westgate Mall being in the city limits. Everything within city limits is part of our planning area. Another question was any plans to increase the size of the city borders? And I think that's probably a staff question.
I can take that one, I guess. We are seeing some modest level and expect that to continue of annexations around the commercial corridors in each direction from the city. We don't envision any single wholesale, large scale annexations. Most of the area around the city limits is already built out, and we are not actively trying to annex existing residential subdivisions. But as commercial redevelopment happens and as new residential development happens within a mile of the city limits, those properties you can expect to be annexed over time.
Great.
One of the things that I'll say to clarify too, just more about sort of what is a comprehensive plan and what does it do. You know, I talked earlier about that it's a vision document, a vision for the future, direction for the future, all of that. But it's important to remember too that it isn't necessarily intending to make particular things happen. It's not intended to say, well, this will develop and be that. It's not a development proposal. And so we'll be looking at things like some of the things we'll generate as part of the comprehensive plan will be strategies for, you know, how do you best capitalize on and really make the most of and get the most benefit from the things you have going from you already? Or what are some things that the city isn't currently doing that you guys could do in order to, you know, make traffic flow better, or to, you know, pick anything, but it's really a strategic thing, because a lot of times when we talk about comprehensive planning and you hear that word plan, a lot of times I think people's mind goes immediately to where we're making a plan, and so what's going to happen to my neighborhood, for instance, and you know, the idea is, what do you want to happen to your neighborhood? Anything. If you want it, if you love it how it is and you want it to stay how it is, then that's great. We need to know that. If you say, a lot of times somebody mentioned the mall a second ago, you know, so often cities we work in have a mall that is not doing well. And so everybody says, oh, we've got to do something with that mall. It's just such an eyesore in the city, and something could be better done with that. And so, you know, the plan might say, oh, well, let's set the mall up for be able to be redeveloped. And when it's redeveloped, what do we want that to be? What do we want that to look like, feel like? What things can benefit the community through a redevelopment of something like a mall? So.
All right. We have a question about COVID-19. It says COVID-19 and its attendant impacts and consequences are changing many conventional wisdom assumptions of how people have worked, lived, and played. These changes range from subtle to dramatic, from gentle to near instantaneous. What steps will be taken to ensure we don't pave the cow paths just because that looked right 2 to 5 to 10 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, figuring out what to do about COVID is, and kind of what the impacts are, is sort of the question of the day, for sure. We've thought a lot about it. A lot of cities have been thinking about it, and you know, making sure that, one, we understand specifically how it's impacted Spartanburg. You know, we know generally how it's impacting communities, but how's it specifically impacted Spartanburg? So for instance, I'll give you an example. In communities that don't have a lot of open space, you know, people may find that they don't have a way to get out, stay distanced, enjoy the outside or whatever. In other places they have tons of open space, and so that's not even something that they're concerned about. So we have to learn about how it's impacting you, but then also looking at national trends. You see, you know, so many people that have lost their jobs, but who are, creative or, entrepreneurial or whatever the case may be. And so you see tons and tons of, small businesses, restaurants, various things starting up in spite of everything that's going on. But what we know is that, small businesses don't necessarily have the money to have a big, fancy, expensive office space. And so do we need to look at things like creating incubator space in the city to allow those types of businesses to grow and thrive as the economy and the country kind of comes back and everything gets back to normal. So that's just one small example. There's just so many. Do we in the future make sure that all new sidewalks are at least 6 feet wide so you can get far enough apart but not have to have somebody walking in the street when you're walking together? Those kind of things. That gets into more of a zoning kind of an issue, but something that we would think about in this plan nonetheless.
All right, the next is a good question related to both climate change and equity. Are you taking into account predictions for how climate change will and is already impacting the area? For example, are you working to increase tree cover so as to avoid enhancing the urban heat island complex, which can be linked to poverty with poorer areas experiencing greater temperature extremes?
Yeah, that's a really neat question, and it's a good one because it segued into something that I wanted to share with all of you. A lot of times when we start talking about equity, and planning, and you think, well, okay, well, how does that play out? What does that look like in the physical world? And one thing that you can see in cities all over the country, it's really amazing. You can nearly start to identify, who lives where from a satellite photograph from outer space. When you see the city and you can see where there's a good tree canopy and where there's not. And so, for a long time, cities have made investments in some neighborhoods and not in other neighborhoods. And a street tree is a good example of that. And so here, I love the way that you tied those two things together. And so climate change and equity, they can work hand in hand, fortunately. So you can really get a more bang for your buck, if you will. And so some of the things we've been kicking around are like related to equity and infrastructure. Call it, let's say, a street tree as an example, or a sidewalk. Maybe you have policy in the city where certain neighborhoods have a partner neighborhood, if you will. They're teamed up, and so you spend in one neighborhood, and then this neighborhood gets it as well. And so you are always sort of splitting your resources up rather than just putting it all in one place. Now, that said, there's a million reasons why, and I'm sure Matt can probably explain, tell me why. There could be unintended consequences of that. There may be sometimes when you really just need to throw all your resources at one spot, and maybe it's the spot that doesn't have any street trees, and maybe you shift your funding for a while until you catch everything up. And so just using that street tree as an example, but I think that there's a lot of merit to thinking about these things together.
All right, next one is, are children and young people being included in this planning process, especially since the plan will directly affect them long term?
Yeah, I'll start with that, Becky, and then I'll let you pick it up. The thing that I always say is it's really easy to get people to participate in a planning process. It seems like, and again, because we get to work in New England a lot, they are nationally a much older community than most other places. They are sort of aging faster. What we found is it's a lot easier to get somebody to participate the older they are. So sometimes it's because they've just gotten to the point in their life where they really want to make an impact and be involved. Sometimes it's because they're retired and they have more time on their hands, whatever the case may be, or they're not like me, running around chasing their 3 kids and getting them all to soccer practice or whatever the case may be. And so there's just more time. Or when we're focusing on the equity side of things too, we know that there are plenty of families that have multiple jobs, and participating in planning and all of that stuff is a real luxury. It's not a necessity in their life. And so But the funny thing about it is the older you are, I think to the point of this question, the less time you're going to have, to be involved with the plan or see the results of the plan. And so in a lot of ways, the plan we're working on today is the plan for the kids and your grandkids. And hopefully the way we like to do plans is have things that are also immediate and happen right away. So everyone who's involved gets to have some benefit from it, some instant gratification. But I think that we've learned over the years that it is important to get kids involved, and we've spent a lot of time thinking about that. Becky, you want to share some specific ideas?
Yeah, that's one thing that it is a bigger challenge, I think, for us because of what's been going on with COVID and everything, is a lot of times we are including children in the process. When people are coming to our in-person events, we actually provide activities for children and childcare for children during the meetings to get them involved. So reaching out to them virtually is a little bit more of a challenge, but we've been exploring ways to talk to the schools, see if there are ways that we can incorporate this into maybe their art projects. Maybe they can draw us pictures of the Spartanburg that they see in the future. We will also be running an art contest as part of the process. We didn't mention that earlier. But we'll release information about that when we get closer to Planapalooza, and that's where we like to get kids to think big and give us their ideas about their flying cars and things like that. But we also want them to think practically and give them a better understanding of planning. So those are things that we're exploring. If you are attending this meeting right now and you work with kids and would like to work with us and help us explore ways to get kids involved, please let us know. Because we're looking for new ideas as well. But yeah, kids are definitely an important part of this.
Well, also too, even if your kids are going to school in person, having the teachers have that be part of the lesson, talk about the comprehensive plan, and so we nearly can provide. They can nearly do an on-the-table session with their class, or even online if they're doing online learning as well. And so, really getting the teachers involved, especially like high school kids and stuff, have civics classes or whatever, social studies or things that are relevant to planning. It's a great tie-in for the curriculum.
So I'm just taking a look really quick at everybody who is on the meeting to see if anyone has unmuted themselves to ask a question. So I want to give them an opportunity to. I see a Jody Treywick. Did you have a question?
Hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I actually put something in the chat.
Okay. All right. We'll keep running through them then. I don't see anyone else unmuted, but I will check periodically if anyone has a question there. The best way to ask the question is in the chat, though. We're going to try to run through those. So the next one I see, and I apologize, I'm going to try to, if I see multiple questions from one person, I will try to jump ahead to somebody else just so everybody gets at least one of their questions answered, and then we'll try to go back to. So I see one that says, how will you handle the challenge of the city being a small part of a much larger community? For instance, many job opportunities are beyond city limits and result in transportation challenges, etc.
Yeah, that's a good one. Matt, you want to take that?
Yeah, well, one of the things that's interesting is in I think it was 2016, we finished a project called Shaping Our Future, which looked at the 10 counties in the upstate part of the region. And really one of the things that came to light was how interdependent some of these folks were together to either shop, to live, to work, those kind of things. And so I've already gotten a little bit of a glimpse and an appreciation for how tight-knit certain parts of the region are. We'll continue to look into that. And so it kind of comes into when we're looking at how to address issues or opportunities. Some of them are met inside the city limits. Some of them we recognize are being met outside, and we try to look at that balance and that partnership between them. But we are fully aware of kind of what's going on in the larger region. One of the other things we kind of do is while we talked about city limits and the 1 mile out, we try to also define what we call our area of influence when we're collecting data and looking at data. And sometimes that area influence is very large depending on the issue we're looking at. And so we will try to create a large enough footprint in our area of influence to take into account how daily needs are being satisfied or what's going on. So we're fully aware of the fact that the community is larger than just city limits for most of you.
We've got a great question about implementing the plan. It says, will the plan include an implementation plan with a recommended timeline, action steps, associated costs, responsible parties, etc.? Who will oversee the implementation process and be accountable to the community? And how will we know where the implementation plan stands at any given time? So I'm going to let Brian answer the first part of that question about implementation, and then I'll let the city staff answer the second part about the actual tracking of the implementation.
What we find is that, you know, comprehensive plans forever have had you know, some sort of an implementation matrix or strategy, and usually in the back in some appendix, and it's good because you can, you know, sort of track the ideas and things and see how you're doing, and like a report card, if you will. What we'd like to do is focus implementation throughout the plan. And so when you start to see recommendations and strategies in the plan, we like to talk about who's responsible for them, and, you know, sort of what are the tools and steps to have that happen. So that way implementation is not an afterthought. It's actually a continuous thought process that's happening throughout the plan. What we find is that the cities that are most effective at implementing a plan are those that do some unusual and unconventional things. One of the cities we worked in did a great poster that they had around City Hall, and each department had a different color box, and there were all the different items from the plan were on the list. And you got an under construction little logo on it, or you got a checkbox. And so it was kind of like a friendly competition amongst the departments to make sure that, you know, they weren't the ones who didn't have any check marks saying that they've accomplished their goals. And so that was fun. The other thing that I would say is who's overseeing the implementation. It really is the citizens. You know, in this day and age, resources in most cities are strapped a little bit and somewhat limited. And so it really, you know, a lot of cities count on the community to come together and take up some of these different initiatives that are, you know, reasonable. Obviously, the citizens aren't going to go repave a road or something, but when it comes to some of the other things that are actually, you know, people have the ability to do as a group of citizens, you can kind of crowdsource that and come together to do it. And then I think, you know, really having the citizens be partners in it, instead of just looking at the city to go, okay, you know, what are you guys doing? How are you implementing this thing? It's everybody together saying, you know, how are we going to implement this? And city, what do you need from us in order to do that? Anybody from staff want to add to that?
No, I think that's a terrific answer. It's we all own it collectively, and I think the city council is very interested in creating an environment where the plan is a living, active document that is front and center and a part of the strategic direction that staff seek to carry out on a regular basis.
Yeah, and you know, I think too, when it comes to timeframes and costs, estimates and things for different ideas in the plan, what we find is even when you have a massive budget for a project that is allocated towards the implementation side of things, and you have engineers and various people who, you know what a linear foot of road costs or sidewalk or whatever, and, you know, can crunch some numbers. What I find is that you know, those cost estimates tend to not be relevant by the time you do things, or even if you can undertake them tomorrow. The cost estimate is just, you know, it just takes so much proper due diligence to give a reasonable cost estimate. So what we like to do is sort of like a Yelp review, or you know, where you have like $1 sign, $2 sign, $3, so sort of the order of magnitude of expense. But most importantly, what we like to do is sort of prioritize the ideas and strategies in the plan. And so it's like, okay, well, here are some things that you ought to do right away, tomorrow. If you can do this, it'll give you lots of momentum. People will get excited. They'll see that the plan is doing something. And then there's other things that are going to take a long time to do and take a lot of effort and coordination, even if it's different cities or agencies, et cetera. And then, but from a, getting the most bang for your buck, which things should you do first? And that's what we like to focus on as the priorities.
All right. There's so many good questions. Let's see. We've got one. Oh, are arts and culture in general going to be included in long-term planning?
Yes.
Yes.
I think, I'm so enamored by your muralism. I hope it never gets to the point where y'all are sort of sick of that mural because everybody loves it so much. Here in Nashville, we have some really great murals that, are photographed and all over the internet, all over the world internationally because they're so cool. And I think really, some of the unique aspects and elements of a city can come from its art. Art is sort of a physical representation of culture. And you also have, great food there as well. And so like, how do we pick up on all of these things that are unique there? And, some things maybe we'll plant the seed of something that doesn't already exist, but what we like to do and find the things that are the most effective are when we can take those things that you already have going on and cultivate them and fertilize them and give them room to grow. And I get the sense that art is part of that for all of you.
This is a challenge. I'm going to admit that keeping track of all these great comments and questions is a little overwhelming.
What's our time frame, Becky? How much time do we have?
Well, I think we'll keep going. We're seeing some people dropping off, but
Oh no.
We'll keep answering. I've got one. Will you include environmental justice in your plan that stops placing landfills, sewage facilities, and transportation hubs in predominantly minority or lower income neighborhoods?
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, comes back to, we talked about at the beginning about, what does equity mean to all of you? What does it look like? What are the specific challenges related to equity? And in this case, you use the term justice. And so, I think that everything's on the table. I mean, we're looking at land uses and where things go. So I think that certainly is, a topic that we need to understand more about, like, what is it specifically that made you ask that question? And then, what do we need to do to address it? So thank you for that. I see another question here, Becky, speaking of equity and how to, it says, we're discussing equity, but I currently do not see anything specifically speaking to the desires of special needs and handicapped citizens of Spartanburg. That's a good one. And that one is, some places we go, I remember in, where is it? Frederick, Maryland, there is a school for the deaf, I think. And so there, I mean, it's like a college. And so there, they really have done all sorts of things in and around that community to, provide, all the things that somebody would need to navigate the city. If they were hearing impaired. And so I think what we need to do is, as always, ask you all to share with us, what that means to you, what are the specific needs. Some places we work, for instance, in, that have a lot of topography, that are very hilly cities and towns, having sidewalks that are easily navigable if you're in a wheelchair or, have mobility issues. Are a challenge. And so understanding the specifics of what causes challenges, if it's physical things that the comprehensive plan can deal with, or if it's just outreach things, like if there are ways that we need to reach out to people who have special needs, then that will also be a component of this. So make sure that you're giving us that feedback when you go on the webpage.
There's another good equity question. Racial inequity was listed as a weakness in Spartanburg, and I'm noticing that the team doesn't have an overwhelming amount of diversity. How engaged are the team members with diversity, inclusion, and racial equity? And how will you bring that into the comprehensive planning process?
Yeah, I think that the team that's here before you tonight, I think that's true of, but the rest of our team has been specifically created to address these issues. Chauncey, when you guys get to meet her, is incredible, and she's out of Washington, D.C., and her whole focus of her planning firm is really focusing on the equity side of things. She's a true expert in it. And then we have Gwen and James, who are equity outreach experts. And so what we're making sure from their perspective that they do is help us to make sure that we don't miss anybody as we go through this process. But at the end of the day, the diversity that is within the city is what we're going to count on for sure. Having all of you and getting all of the voices heard, having everyone feel comfortable, meeting people where they are, all of the things that we do. I mean, I always tell the story of one of the first times that I was confronted with, really trying to struggle and address equity and equity issues. And this was more of this was a much lighter time, but we were like, oh, this is great. This community, it's, they have all of these refugees from around the world in the public schools in the city. They spoke like 63 languages. It was incredibly diverse. And we're like, wow, this is a huge opportunity and a strength. Let's have, let's do something to get people to come out and share with us. And so we had this great idea. We're going to have a multicultural breakfast, and everyone was going to bring food from their home countries, and we're all going to sit around and talk about, how we can, really, meet the needs of the refugee population there. And 2 people showed up, and those 2 people came to tell us what a stupid idea it was, and how we were so clueless. And we appreciated that. And we then said, okay, thank you for teaching us. But now let's take it one step further. What do we need to do? How do we need to reach out and get people to get involved? And they said, you have to come to the neighborhood. You have to come to the schools. You have to, meet people where they are instead of expecting them to come to you. And so they're part of our public outreach process is going to incorporate that. Obviously, it stifles things a little bit when we've got, the inability to really get into the neighborhoods as much as we'd like to. But when it comes down to it, we're going to be having events in the neighborhood. James, Chauncey, others are going to be leading some of those events. So it's something that.
Brian, I'll chime in with.
Please.
With an invitation for folks to recognize that the city staff team will be supporting this project as well. And so there may be connections and touch points. We want to marry the benefits of having national expertise with a heavily community-driven process, and the city staff team that will be supporting this effort. It's really all of the city leadership, but those that are working most closely with it will be Natalia Rosario in our planning office, Martin Livingston, who's our community development director, Mitch Kennedy, who's the assistant city manager, and Natasha Pitts, who is leading our equity and inclusion efforts at the city, and Christopher George in our communications office. There'll be a whole team of folks that you all interact with regularly that will be interacting with the consultant team throughout. And so we'll try to, we know that the experts that we're able to engage through this process that do bring to the table that important national perspective can't be everywhere all the time. And even city staff can't be everywhere all the time, but we will try to do our very best to extend and engage and participate at the neighborhood level to the extent is necessary to get a full, clear picture of the will of the community.
Awesome. Thank you, Christopher.
I want to thank everybody who's sent. We've gotten some suggestions for ways to connect with some faith leaders and school groups and things like that. So thank you for those comments. That's great. I've got a question about transportation. Will the plan address the fast and dangerous traffic on South Pine Street, where South Pine intersects with East Main? The truck traffic divides our downtown area in a very dangerous way, excluding safe pedestrian traffic, as well as the unity of the downtown shopping experience.
Well, it will now. Thank you for bringing it up.
Yep, exactly.
That's how this process works. See, we don't need any traffic counts to tell them. You just told us.
Tell us where the issues are. And that's a good time to remind everyone to go to planspartanburg.com. Tell us what you think. There's a place where you can tell us what the big issues that Spartanburg is facing are. So be specific like that. I've got one. Does the city plan involve sourcing more renewable electricity, such as solar panels on city buildings, etc.? Again, that sounds like a good big idea.
Yeah, we'll put that on the list and explore it. You know, some of the places we work, we have some of these, you know, more sustainable solutions. And, you know, I can't remember where we were working, we were saying, oh, you know, there's all kinds of cool ways we can deal with the stormwater sustainably. And they said, yeah, you see that dirt over there, about 3 inches underneath that dirt is rock. And so no stormwater can actually penetrate in this part of the country, whereas other areas we work, that's a great idea. And so we'll have to understand more about the specifics of it. But I think that even just having the idea that, you know, renewable energy is something that is important to the community, or something to have as a goal, could show up as a recommendation in the plan.
I want to jump back to one that I missed that was submitted earlier. What are the plans to lease up the vacancies on Main Street downtown? For example, the Crest building that has been vacant forever.
Yeah, I don't know yet. You know, I think that, and that the vacancies is something that we're facing in a lot of cities too. And, you know, I mean, on the one hand, it's kind of like, okay, well, that's not, if it's been vacant forever, it's not because of COVID. But on the other hand, there may be other spaces that are vacant because of COVID. So just once our economist gets in and starts looking at it, he's going to have, you know, some incredible ideas, I'm sure, about how to address, you know, all of these types of issues. But obviously vacancies, you know, don't work well for a vital, you know, streetscape, if you will.
All right. One good reminder, I think, right now is that we are still at the beginning of the process. So I know there's been a few questions here about what we're planning on doing, and we're not sure yet. There's a lot of decisions that need to be made, and a lot more things that we need to hear from you all about what your issues are before we can tell you what we're planning to do.
Yeah, in addition to asking questions, you can literally just, you know, put comments up here as well. Just say, you know, oh, you should look into this, or oh, make sure you think about that too. So.
Yeah, we've got those. And just for everyone's knowledge, I've actually got all of the comments printed out. I'm highlighting each one in one color as we address them. If there are recommendations to look into something else, I'm highlighting it in a different color. So we're looking at everything. Even if we don't tackle everything in this meeting right now, we're going to go back and look at all of it. Here's a question about the data. It says, could you share what kind of data sets you're reviewing? I'm particularly curious about census-tracked neighborhood level data related to environmental health, air pollution, for example, and environmental justice issues, as well as the shade equity issue raised earlier. I think, Natalia, you may be the best one to answer that question. We haven't put you on the spot.
Sure. I mean, you can. I mean, we have plenty of data right now. I'm not exactly sure what all you all at TPDC are looking at, but we have Buxton data. We certainly have plenty of data sets. Laura, you probably have the same ones, but if we do come across anything new in this process, definitely happy to share with any of the institutions or anybody interested.
Becky, maybe if I can just add to, you know, we're going to obviously comb through all the secondary data sources that there are out there, whether it's, you know, census or statewide GIS, county GIS, city GIS. when I say GIS, it's geographic information system. So it's the data that's tied to a specific area of the community. But sometimes we have to create our own data too, and we'll look, and maybe I have to draw or digitize something in order to wrestle with a question we have. One of the things I will mention, or I would like to mention here when it comes to data, I was on the team who worked on the City of Charlotte's comprehensive plan. And as part of that, the team worked on what was called an equity atlas. And I think that's something that might be worth doing here as well, which is to just categorize the data in a way that we can turn it on and off and see how some of the decisions or some of the ideas we're contemplating, what happens when we turn on those different variables to look at an equitable distribution of both challenges and opportunities. And so maybe the one thing I'll add that might be a little different this time around is how we package the data. So while we're packaging it, we may try to create this sort of equity atlas as part of the planning process.
Thank you, Matt.
Here's a good one. Does the committee address the issue of food deserts? Can we all agree that this is an issue within Spartanburg?
Yeah, this is something that actually has come up from the earliest discussions about this project, and one of the things that you can often point to, I used the street tree example before, but the idea of a food desert is also a good sort of physical manifestation of equity. And for those who aren't familiar with that term, food desert is really where you have a geographical area where there isn't any close proximity to good and healthy food, and so finding ways to combat that, to in some ways it's a challenge because knowing how businesses are, grocery stores and other places like that would provide that food, they look at the numbers, they look at the all of the metrics and the measurements they use to decide whether or not they're going to locate in a particular area, and those numbers are what they are. And so how do we find ways to either incentivize to overcome that, or to find alternative solutions to conventional grocery stores and other things, neighborhood scale markets that are can sustain themselves economically, other things as well. And so it's something that is at the forefront for sure. Thank you for that.
And I actually, at the very moment we started answering that question, I received a private message from someone else who had a very similar question. So I hope that we answered that adequately for both of you. And then we got a recommendation about some data that we could find about SNAP and food deserts in South Carolina. So that's great too. We've got a question, will we have neighborhood meetings? Yes, I don't know if this is someone who joined maybe later in the presentation, but I want to reiterate that there is this on the table tool that we're going to be using that will allow people to go out and do small group meetings. We're also encouraging church leaders, other community leaders to hold their own meetings. As far as going out into specific neighborhoods at a staff level, that's something that's kind of been ever changing with the way that things are going with social distancing, but that's something that is in the works.
And so far as we can have them, we will. And there may be, it may end up having to be neighborhood meeting that is online. But one of the things that I mentioned earlier was, some of our outreach team is going to be involved in that. And then also Natalia is really excited about getting, involved with the neighborhood groups and getting that input from them directly. So yes, there will be neighborhood meetings, but we want, and we're going to have a neighborhood ambassadors program too. So that people who really want to, kind of have a extra special involvement in this and say, yeah, I'm committed to helping get the word out, because I know that, as out of towners or even as city staff who live and work in town, they don't know everybody, and they don't know everybody in the neighborhoods. And even if how to get in touch with somebody in the neighborhood, we all know that if your friend asks you to participate, it's way different than if, some random stranger or, somebody else asks you. So we're counting on that. But yes, neighborhood level interaction is important.
We've also had a couple of questions about the higher education institutions in town. One of them is whether it's possible to have a graduate student carry out a study on how to improve the K through 12 and the higher education institutions in town. And then a similar comment about how we should have a university center to capitalize on the 7 colleges in Spartanburg to attract more students and improve the relationship with the community. So yeah, I think that communicating with those higher education institutions is very important to us as well. And then I've got a long comment related to transportation. It says, I'm concerned about the plight of pedestrians and bicycle riders in the city of Spartanburg. We're encouraged to walk and ride our bikes, but few streets in Spartanburg are safe for walking and bike riding. I feel some deficiencies in this sector are lack of curbing and sidewalks, poor lighting of intersections, poor marking of crosswalks, apathy by drivers, apathy by law enforcement, need of reflective clothing by pedestrians, reflective marking and lighting on bicycles and mopeds. And then we need alternative modes of travel from vehicles, but we have marginal public transportation. So do you think we should concentrate on pedestrian and bicycle modes? If so, how do we implement procedures to overcome the deficiencies listed? Those are all wonderful questions and ideas, and our transportation consultant is going to be very excited to talk about all of that. And then I've got one. I think it's important to keep and increase the current number of police. In the reading in preparation for this meeting, what does the planning team envision for changes in the city police force, since security has to be in place for prosperity to happen?
Yeah, one of the images that we used, one of the slides that we showed earlier that Matt talked about, showed how he looks at the sort of infrastructure needs as it relates to growth and development in the future. And one of the slides, if you've noticed on the left-hand side, I think it said fire stations and then the current fire stations and then future fire stations needed. And so we'll, Matt, you're better suited to talk about that than I am, but in general, we'll look at some of the, the specific needs based on, national averages and metrics and things as well.
Yeah, as part of the assessment we do on community facilities and services, whether it's police, fire, parks, water, sewer, schools, the list goes on of things we'll look at. And we'll benchmark where you are today in your current service delivery. And then we'll project that forward, trying to decide what you might need in the future. But also maybe the service delivery is not where you want it today. And so we might look at what needs to be done to increase rates or other provisions in order to kind of increase above and beyond what you're doing today. So all 3 of those things will be looked at as part of the planning process.
I think I just have one more. We at the city have been focused on youth development with our north and south side of town. Is there any work that will be focused on the youth that live within the city limits on the east and west sides of town?
Yes, we're gonna look at all aspects on all sides of the town, of the city. And I like that you guys have sort of these geographical references, the way you think about the city, sort of is in bite-sized pieces, if you will. And so, it can be a good thing, but, we can also, as we're looking at equity side of things, making sure that, we're seeing those as handy distinctions as opposed to dividers, if you will. So we're going to look at, all aspects of the city geographically as well.
I think that's all of our questions. I don't know if there's anyone else who hasn't had a chance to ask a question or that still has one. I don't see anyone unmuting, but if anyone would like to unmute themselves and just blurt out a question, that would be okay too. We want to make sure we got to them all. If for some reason we did miss something or we didn't answer your question as thoroughly as you would have hoped, feel free to follow up with us. Go to the website. There's contact information on there.
This is Jody Trawick. I did have one on there that you didn't mention.
All right.
The issue of consolidation of city and county government.
Oh, I did miss that one.
Yeah, I think that's probably more of a Chris question, but I mean, it's something that we'll look at. You know, a lot of places we work, people ask questions along those lines. It's something that communities have been thinking about. Some cities we worked in, they were saying, well, should we merge with the next city over? That, you know, that was an interesting one, thinking about even picking a name for a new city, who gets top billing. So we'll look at that if that's something that is the, you know, benefits of that. But Chris, is there any more you want to add to that or background?
I think the more appropriate question would be at this point to look at where services and resources and opportunities could be utilized more efficiently. And there are a number of services that we do cooperatively with the county and have done for years, and we're always working with our counterparts at county council to figure out where some more of those efficiencies can lie. So I think duplication of services and efforts, if we can identify those and reduce or eliminate those, would be great to pursue. And certainly we would encourage ideas along those lines for sure.
Okay.
Thank you.
We've had one more come in on the chat. In keeping with equity, can we create more green spaces and nature settings on the south side? We will take a look at that.
Yeah, we'll look at where you have open spaces, you know, where you need open spaces, and so you've directed us to the south, so we'll check that out. I like this comment about, in addition to looking at food deserts, looking at food swamps, places where you have food but it's all unhealthy. I think that's going to be a good one.
All right. I think we're going to wrap it up. I'm going to ask everyone for one favor before we do. One thing that we usually do when we have large meetings like this is take a photo of everyone. So if anyone would like to turn your cameras on, I'm going to take a screenshot of everybody in the meeting. I'll give everyone a minute. And if anybody else is still struggling to ask a question, let us know. I don't want to miss anyone.
Oh, this is so great. Hello, everybody.
All right. So I can't even fit everyone all in one screen, so I'm going to do this a couple times.
But the host has me, Phoenix, videoed out, so you have to undo me.
All right.
All right. I
turned on Phoenix.
just asked you to start video.
There we go. Phoenix is rising.
You betcha.
All right. I'm gonna do that one again. So get one screen.
Are you gonna say cheese, Becky? You're gonna tell everybody when to smile to make a weird face?
Well, so not everybody's all on one screen at the same time. So okay, first group, everyone smile.
This is a serious Brady Bunch moment here.
There's one. We go to the next page. We got a few here. All right, everybody smile again. All right.
Oh, great. What a good idea, Becky. Thank you for that.
Oh, wait.
Cool.
I want to make sure I got everybody. Looks like I have another set of people that I missed.
Man,
All right, one more. Smile.
I'm getting tired.
You're not in this one, Brian. You're back on the first page.
Okay.
I've got a few people on my third page. All right, got them all.
All right.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
We appreciate you being here, and we're looking forward to working with you more.
And if when you're leaving comments and things on the webpage and stuff, just also if there's things that we could do with the technology that'll make it easier or better for you, let us know that too, because we want to improve this process as we go. So it's a challenge. We love looking at everybody eye to eye normally. So this is probably the most frustrating for me having to do it this way, but I'm glad to be with you all nonetheless. So thank you all for participating.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. We're so grateful for your time.
Yes.
Night.
All right, bye.
Right.